Hi, I'm Rich Colgard, former publisher of Forbes and now futurist and editor at large. And I'm here in New York City at the CIO Next conference that we're putting on later today. And I'm thrilled to be talking to Wendy Batchelder, who's the Chief Data Officer of Trust at Salesforce. Welcome to Forbes and welcome to New York.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The value of trust, particularly in this kind of economy, is paramount. Talk about it.
Yeah, it is really interesting to me that in this time when there's so many concerns about coming out of the pandemic, the economic uncertainty, supply chain transparency issues, et cetera, that all we're trying to do is make things more trustworthy. And the customers that we're interacting with are saying more and more about that. There was a recent study by McKinsey that showed that customer sentiment around trust with companies who they knew were protecting their information was now as equivalent as pricing and quality in their buying decisions. I found that really fascinating, that we're at this pivotal moment where consumer behavior mirrors trust above all else.
Wendy, you have a working phrase at Salesforce called data is an accelerant, not a threat. What do you mean by that?
You know, I think it's really interesting to see how many people across the organization really want to use data but still struggle to get it into their everyday needs. We see this tremendous gap between what a CEO wants and being data-driven and having more data empowering their decision-making process, as something like 83% of CEOs say that that's what they want. But when you talk to the individual employee, they say only 30% are actually data-driven. So there's this tremendous gap that we need to be able to fill in corporations around data governance, data culture, data training, and really providing data literacy enterprise-wide. And the really interesting thing that I really love that we're moving towards is this wider aperture towards varying skill sets and really moving away from people having to have had computer science education or a PhD in data science to be a data analyst, and now being able to really train up the broad sense of workforce through some of our initiatives. We have this campaign of 10 million educated individuals around data literacy by 2026. And that, I think, speaks volumes to the fact that there is this enormous gap between what CEOs want and what employees really feel. And we have to work together to solve that gap.
Well, that leads to the bridge where you really spend a lot of your time, and that is the bridge between trust and data. That data properly accumulated and analyzed can really drive trust into deeper levels in the organization and deeper levels with the customer and suppliers.
Absolutely. The really interesting thing about that is, it's really easy to be complicated and put data everywhere that it's convenient and try to access it at your will. It's a lot harder to be simplified in how we do that. And I think Tableau is one of the ways that we've been able to do that both internally and with our customers, is really driving that democratized governance so that we can get analytics and insights into the hands of the people that need it most when they need it in a consistent and trusted manner. So just being able to rely on the information when you need to is so important today. That speed and agility is critical.
So talk about simplicity and speed, and if you would, give us some examples of how data has made something simpler for a Tableau customer or allowed the customer to do something confidently and fast, where otherwise they might have, debated the thing internally forever.
Absolutely. It's really interesting. It really comes back to a lot of the basics of data management, governance, understanding the transparency in metadata, being able to confidently rely on data through data quality practices, depending on mastered data. So things like, consistent information about your customers, which certainly can lead into use of CRM and other kinds of technologies and tools that we use internally ourselves in a Salesforce on Salesforce way. But I do see customers relying on information a lot more, leveraging Tableau, single pane of glass for consistent metrics that matter. So really getting the company organized around specific use cases, aligning the executive team to a core set of metrics does really help significantly in making sure that our customers can rely on information that matters to them when it matters. And there are several companies that we have been working with very specifically on speed. JP Morgan Chase recently did a large project with Tableau in that space, as well as Feeding America. So we're really working across all industries and disciplines to enable that kind of behavior.
How do you convince the holdouts that probably are older, senior, like the way things are, perhaps feel threatened? How do you? Well, tell us how you do, because this is where you live.
It is. I find that one of the best ways to be able to get some of maybe the adversaries or the naysayers about data to really get on board, sometimes to supply them with information that validates their opinion and just show them, look, this is exactly as you intended. This is exactly what your gut is telling you. And it helps them to start to open their mind a little bit about the fact that maybe data is right and that they can trust it. And so by supporting their existing tendencies, you can start to give them data in a way that helps open their eyes. And then over time, you can start to introduce metrics that maybe drive a little bit more conflict in their internal expectations and help them to see that, it's not threatening them. It is actually helping them to make better decisions. And so that's one way that I've seen work really, really well, but also working around them too. If you can help get other supporters that are in adjacent roles to them to be using data and pulling it into their natural conversations, then it starts to create sort of a groundswell and a peer-to-peer influence that, using data is not a threat, it's actually an accelerant. And so I think those are two ways that I've seen be very effective in several different companies, but it does take a wide variety of executives to really make data truly trustworthy. It doesn't just fall on the shoulders of the CDO. It also comes from the chief privacy officer, or maybe you have a chief ethics officer. We have an individual in our company that is responsible for ethical and humane use of technology. Our chief security officer, for example. It really takes all of these roles working together to really drive trust in information and trust in how we use our tech. It doesn't just sit on the CDO and the CIO's shoulders to carry that burden.
Talk about sort of trust and autonomy and speed. We talked about speed, but the idea of autonomy at the team level and then autonomy at the individual level.
Sure. I think that the interesting thing about data is really getting it democratized into the hands of everyone that needs it when they need it. And I personally think that being able to have everyone have access to the data that they need, not more and not less, really drives that autonomy, gives people the ability to use data that in new and different ways without oversharing or undersharing that information.
Talk about kind of the value of trust in an organization as a recruiting, retention, and upskilling weapon.
Mm-hmm. I think that we're seeing this more and more with new generations as well, that trust and values are decision-making tools, and people are taking jobs based on companies that they trust and that they believe trust them. And so I think trust is a great currency in building the workforce of tomorrow and really bringing in talented individuals into your organization. So I don't think it's an option anymore to be trustworthy or to value trust. I think that if you want to recruit the best talent, that has to be a priority. And it's our number one value at Salesforce, and you can feel it in everything that we do.
Well, if you could reduce what you've learned working with your clients and reduce it into some tips. Here's what to look for, here's what to do, here's what's worked at companies that look like you to widen the aperture, to get a bigger talent pool, and to make sure that data literacy flowers in all parts of the organization. Where do people start? Where do managers start, and what should they be looking to do?
Sure. I think that it's really interesting to hire people who are curious. So someone who's going to really be exploratory with data, who's going to look at it and think, what is this really telling me? Who can apply it in business context? And sometimes those individuals may have come from a data science background or an analytics profession, and sometimes not. Do they like to learn? Are they willing to learn new languages or new approaches to looking at data?
I love this emphasis on curiosity.
Yeah, I love the questions around, so what? Like if someone can give you an answer about what the data is telling you, my first question is always, so what? What does it mean for the business? How do we really explore that? How do we apply it? And the people who can answer that question, to me, are your brightest analysts, because they've taken the time to really understand how that data applies to their business scenario. And to me, that skill is the best in a data analyst.
Well, Wendy Batchelder, this has been a fascinating conversation. It's so great to meet you in person here at the Forbes CIO Next Conference in New York at the end of October.
Thanks, Rich, for having me.